Okay, welcome everyone to HEC Montreal's Chair in Energy Sector Management webinar series. I'm Joanne Whitmore, Senior Researcher at the Chair. So today's presentation will look at the learnings from 30 years of integrated development in shared mobility, demand-responsive transit, and the built environment in Switzerland. Our guest speaker is Arnd Bätzner. Since 2011, Arnd is a member of the Board of Directors of Switzerland's nationwide mobility car sharing system. He has extensive experience in providing consulting on the alignment of multimodal transit systems with the built environment and strategic land use planning. Recent mandates include a transport master plan for Staten Island in New York City, an urban ropeway as backbone of an urban mobility plan in India, core elements of a shared mobility concept in Boston, and a leading role in designing norms on new smart urban mobility in Germany. Arnd holds a master in physics and transit management from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. He's currently a PhD candidate at the University of St. Gallen's Institute for Systemic Management and Public Governance. Alongside his studies, he's worked also in economic research with Credit Suisse and First Boston, and has done work in corporate strategies. Arnd is a member of the standing committees on rail transit system, passenger intermodal facilities, and paratransit of the Transportation Research Board of the U.S. National Academies. He's also a member of the French Ministries of Sustainable Development and Transportation Joint Working Group on future autonomous vehicle and logistics application. His presentation will last about 40 minutes. We will then have 20 minutes to take questions. Participants can send in their questions at any during the presentation by typing them into the GoToWebinar platform. That should be in a window on the right side. And I will read the question afterwards, and Arnd will be able to answer them. So Arnd, the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. I mean, it's a big pleasure to have you here, and I will extend that especially to Québec. Bonsoir, c'est un grand plaisir d'être avec vous cet après-midi et de partager ces slides. Salutations cordiales de Suisse. So very heartfully greetings from Switzerland. This webinar will have three major pieces. The first will be, we look at what solutions we have been working on in the past 3 decades in Switzerland on integrating demand responsive solutions with fixed route transit. The second part will be to look a little bit at the existing, historic, and upcoming urban constraints. That and the third part will be extrapolating what challenges in the future we might hold, and we'll make a little detour via energy management in mass transit. Okay, so I'll start off with 5 meta drivers of future mobility just to get us started. Well, one of them is, of course, the rule of suburbia today, urban sprawl, a key sustainability inhibitor, something that is greedy for land, time, energy, and people's lives. What was a 1960s dream was re-emerging as a 2000s nightmare, and what we have here is a landscape, an urbanscape that is impossible or difficult, at least, to serve by public transportation. Then one of the second major drivers we are seeing is the rising of networks of green infrastructure, where data is the new oil, and smart solutions and logistics replace what we had for the past 50 years. Infrastructure deployment in the past has been fostering the dependency on private transport. Retail, as we know it, is declining. Malls are increasingly appearing as dinosaurs of a bygone era, and there's an ecosystem of IT-driven service economies that is taking over gradually. So understanding future urban mobility is understanding retail and services, and one of the urban vehicles of the future will, of course, be the delivery van. So all this calls for a reconsideration of the political economy of urban territories. The next step, the next factor we need to consider is informality. We shouldn't forget that places like Mexico City, for example, are up to 90% built by non-architects. And it's not only deficits in governance that drive informal urbanism, but it's also at the speed of the developments that we have today. And of course, retrofitting infrastructure, in contrast to planning ahead, is always a major headache. So we need to address questions of formalization of informal transport solutions that develop in these contexts, and be conscious that transport interventions are always inseparable from urban interventions. And that would be a change in paradigm of what we had in the past decades. So all that calls, of course, in the end, for a thorough understanding of socio-economic conditions of people, of inhabitants, and of sociotopies that you have locally. Another factor is social housing, densification, and urban tensions. Here in Europe, social housing, despite starting out with the very best idea, largely went wrong. Due to a lack of basic resources, due to sometimes a lack of political stability, and very often, and this is the underestimated factor in the whole debate, very often to a lack of infrastructure, which besides education and health also includes utilities, namely transportation. Access to mobility today is, especially for those that are underprivileged, a very basic necessity, and we need to reconsider and redraw that if we want to get the idea of social housing, the good idea of social housing, the necessary idea, back where we should have it. And finally, one of those 5 factors is also adaptive technologies. We have, especially in the global south, seen technologies that emerged in contexts completely different from those in which they were born. On the very left, you see a hand-drawn aquarelle picture from the early 1960s, which was then a project for the new to-be-built Paris business quarter of La Défense in the west of Paris, today's stop of the Metro Line 1. And already at that time, over 50 years back, people were thinking of using urban cable cars and footbridges in the 3rd dimension, elevated infrastructure and transportation to serve these things. On the very right, what you see there is an escalator that has been built up a hill in a slum in South America in order to keep people from having to climb every day several times up and downs with their shopping, with their items, kids going to school, the hill, and easing transportation. So technologies get transferred out of the context in which they were born and succeed in totally new local contexts. Let me get to the Swiss approach on shared transportation, how we get from standalone modes to paratransit. And paratransit is a vocabulary here that I'm using in the broad form of it, not for Medicaid, not for medical transportation only, but in the large form for every on-demand mode that we'll see emerge and that we'll need to integrate with other solutions in the future. In Switzerland, we very early embarked on vehicle sharing as one of the solutions. And vehicle sharing, of course, there are several options. One of them is car sharing. Car sharing consists of several drivers sharing vehicles instead of each having their own. And we can demonstrate today that we have substitution effects in a ratio of up to 1:18, which has been proven in a lot of scientific studies, among others by Susan Shaheen in Berkeley. But the new objective that we're having now is to make car sharing to make it part of the public paratransit offer. And the big question, of course, is how we can integrate it with mass transit that is established and how we can prevent these things from being standalone systems. So in getting this integration on the road, are there any large-scale models, experiences, or case studies? Yes, they are. And in Switzerland, we have some of them. Just for the vocabulary, in car sharing, we differentiate between 2 major operational modes. One being station-based car sharing, where the vehicles are taken from certain places, pods, and are put back in that very same pod where you take it from. And of course, these pods can be in transit hubs. Then there's the other concept of free-floating car sharing, where the vehicle can be picked up and put back on any legal parking space within a given business area, within a given perimeter. And of course, and with the free floating systems, the pickup location and the drop-off location can be different. And of course, also there, the vehicles can be picked up or dropped off near transportation hubs. So how can we integrate shared modes with rail transit? Let me briefly give you an account, a few key numbers on the company that we have nationwide operating here in Switzerland. We are serving every location, every small town, every village with more than 10,000 inhabitants, also many that have less than that. We are operating nationwide. We have about 3,000 vehicles, of which roughly 1,200 are in transportation hubs. And the station sizes from which you can pick up and put back the vehicles are anything from 1 to 50 vehicles in size. What is also important is that we operate 25% of those pods, of those stations, at a loss, because we consider it part of what in Switzerland we call, there's this French term which called service public, which in the Swiss administrative language means giving a service to the public. So it's a way of contributing to the greater good, and we're subsidizing that with the equivalent of $600,000 per year in order to have it and to have the network effects play on that. So we have, besides the station-based system, we have a limited option of having one-way rentings between the stations, and we operate on top of the 2 local free-floating systems in selected markets, which at this point are Basel, the Greater Basel area, and Geneva. We've got 140,000 registered customers, 50% of which roughly are members of the co-op, so gave a commitment by investing into the company to support the development of the system. And we have, since day one, been fully integrated with transit in terms of location, in terms of pricing models, and in terms of marketing. And we run for the moment our self-developed software, which is one of the few in the world that can do both return car sharing and free floating car sharing. Plus, we do, of course, a lot of consulting, and we sell turnkey car sharing solutions to corporate fleets and to cities, to municipalities who want to build a similar system. So what we have is we have 3,000 vehicles, as I said, that are in 8 classes. We've got anything from a smart car to a van. What you see here is the Lucerne railway station in central Switzerland. On the left, you've got the rail terminal. In the center, you've got the bus terminal. And what you see, all the red vehicles there are entering is our car sharing fleet entering the subterranean parking lot in which you can descend seamlessly from the rail station and from the bus station to access a car sharing vehicle and to drive off if ever there were the need for you to do so. And just for the complement, on the right hand side, you see the lake. That's where the boats leave, which are also fully integrated in public transit. So to put that on a map again, here are the roughly 1,300 pods. And if we integrate that, we superlay that with the nationwide rail and bus network. The rail connectors in that picture would be the rail lines, main line and subsidiary lines, and the yellow ones would be the interurban and alpine buses. So if you overlay these systems, you see that we are not only present in all the major big cities, but also in the Alpine valleys and in small towns in the mountains where you've got very limited use for the cars, but if there is a demand, it should be fulfilled. We've also got roaming agreements, for example, with Germany, where our customers can seamlessly use with their card, with their smart card, to open the vehicles, the vehicles that are a part of the network that Deutsche Bahn operates in Germany, and vice versa. And Switzerland's national public transportation system has a nationwide integration of all modes in terms of timetable, in terms of ticketing. So you've got mainline rail, private rail operators, you've got the rural and the alpine bus services, you've got the water transport on the lakes, cable transport in the mountains, and the urban transport networks that are all integrated, if need is, into one single ticket that can be anything physically from the Edmondson, the old Edmondson, a paper ticket that emerged almost 180 years ago in Britain, down to the ticket that would be on the Apple Watch. And of course, then there are TVMs with assistants. There are paper tickets to self-print. There's a yearly pass. There's whatever you could want to use. And most of these tickets, almost all of them, can include several modes and can serve for the whole journey, not only for parts of it. So you see that many of these tickets have a symbol on the upper corner, which basically is a train, a bus, and a tram, which shows the basic components, but also other parts of the system are parts of it. Also, the boats on the lakes are integrated. Bike sharing is now integrated. Cable cars are integrated. So the idea here is to make it as simple as possible. 3 years ago, we completed that full inclusion of shared modes into the customer value chain by introducing a new fare media that we call the Swiss Pass, which is basically an RFID card that does not only store your train tickets, be it seasonal passes or individual tickets, but it can also serve to open our car sharing vehicles, to open public bike rental systems, bike share systems. It can hold your winter sports tickets, so you can use it for skiing and literally hold it to the fare gate at the ski lift if you do sports. And museum passes and other things are to be included in the future. So it's like really a mobility tool that fits in your purse and should reduce the attractivity for you to get your own vehicle, which probably would be underused. If we look at the sales of the nationwide half-fare cards and the rail passes, we see an impressive sales growth between 2003 and 2013. What you have on the left is the million units sold inside the Swiss population. If we see also for the general season ticket that includes all public transportation for a whole year, unlimited for the fixed route modes, you see that we sell almost 500,000 of these passes a year out of a population of 8 million inhabitants, which basically gives you 1 in 17 citizens that has an annual unlimited free flow ticket to public transportation with no need to own a car. And if they need a car, they can use the car sharing vehicles that are available 24/7 in self-service. So what you see here is really the idea that transport should be as simple as pressing the button on the door of a public transportation vehicle. What you see on the left is this rail pass that has over 100 years of tradition in integrating transport. This is a copy of the one that was owned by the general that led the Swiss Army during the Second World War. Of course, Switzerland, not everything is perfect. We've got areas of improvement, one of them being taxis. We have not really found an answer yet to what we call the taxi problem. There's among taxi operators a lack of quality and coordination. They're, if I may say so, ridiculously expensive, and mainly because of that, not considered part of the public transport system. An airport ride in Zurich downtown from the airport that would cost you 5 or 6 or 7 Canadian dollars on a train will probably set you back something like 80 to 100 if you take a cab, and that shows you which problem we need to address here. What we do have, though, is a sort of a self-drive taxi, which are the mobility car sharing vehicles. Again, 3,000 vehicles nationwide, both in urban and rural regions. And very often they are parked, if ever we can, right there where you get off the train or off the bus, so that there's no long walking, no searching. That's also why most of the vehicles are red. You can spot them easily. You see immediately where they go. You've got a signage that takes you from the platform right to where your vehicle is. Now let's look a bit at the network density on a national level. What you have down there is a scale of 20 miles. On a national level, each of these little squares would represent the number of vehicles that you have in a certain area. So, for example, in the Zurich area, in the central of the picture, you would have 355 vehicles in this form of display. If we break that down, we also have one vehicle, for example, in the small pot there that we see out there in the Alps. If we zoom in on the regional level, we see that it's getting a lot denser, and these vehicles are really aligned with transit. What you see here in blue is the main railway line leaving Zurich, the rail corridor leaving Zurich to the west, which basically serves a densely populated industrialized region. And you see all the car sharing pods lined up along the railway line with people in the stations being able to request and to use these cars if ever there were a need to do so. And if we break it down to a local level, if we zoom in further, you see that this is an example from the inner city of Zurich. You see that literally you've got a car on every so many street corners near you. So you probably no longer have to, you probably don't have to walk more than a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to get to the nearest car sharing vehicle that would be near you. Also, what is very important is the physical setup of the system. If you really want to promote intermodality, you want these vehicles to be very close near the public transportation so that people do not have to make long ways. This is an example from St. Gallen in eastern Switzerland. We've got 20 meters to the train from the place where the cars sit. This is an example from Geneva Airport, 300 meters to the check-in desks, 100 meters to the train. This is an example from a garage in St. Moritz in the winter sport resorts, where on the left you see a four-wheel drive vehicle that is there because you've got frequent snow. And on the right-hand side of the picture, you see some examples from the fleet. So there's anything from electric cars to convertibles to business cars that in that case are not red, but gray, silver, or black. Also, for the free-floating systems that we operate, I mentioned before that we operate 2 free-floating systems that are superimposed on the red cars, on the return car sharing in the cities of Basel and Geneva. Also there we created special drop-off pods for the people that would want to give this free-floating car back near the rail station, that would want to return it there, so that they don't have to go around the train station in the nearby area and spend their time looking for a parking lot. But they've got special reserved places which are just for the drop-off, and where other customers that leave the train, you see it in the back, 15 meters in the back, that could kind of pick that car up and use it for their own purpose. So it's all about proximity, it's all about facilitation, it's all about making the customer journey easy. Same story at the multinational airport of Basel. The airport of Basel serves both Germany, France, and Switzerland, because all 3 countries come together there locally. So it's called the Euro Airport. The code is BSL. And that's also where we have these drop-off spaces where the car sharing vehicles can just be dropped off outside the terminal, which you see in the back. So it's a 50-meter walk that will get you there, and off you fly. Again, the base for all the success that we had with this up to now is the idea of cooperation between all the actors in the transport system, and of seamlessness in usability, accessibility, comfort, interchanges, and fares. We think in terms of the journey of the customer, not in terms of an isolated mode. That also is also reflected by marketing. What you see here is a logo on the left, the Uniréseau logo, which is the Geneva tariff community, where locally all public transport is integrated. And this logo is also on the car sharing vehicles, which underlines that these vehicles are not private vehicles held by a car sharing operator, but are public transport vehicles that you're supposed to drive yourself. That's the approach, that's the logic, that's the idea. And then also you can take that further. For example, we are starting in some places, this is an example from Zurich, to convert on-street parking into car sharing pods, because as I said before, the cities know that every car sharing vehicle that is well operated takes 10, 15, 18 vehicles, privately held vehicles off the road. So we have got limited options to convert on-street parking into car sharing. And you see it on the left, formerly on-street parking places that have been converted into car sharing bays. So we see this is actually a comparison between a Communauto that I found from Quebec and mobility car sharing, where you see that we've had very strong growth rates, both in terms of vehicles and in terms of users over the last years. It's from a paper by Scott Levine. Same thing from a study from Frost and Sullivan that looks out at the markets globally. You've got skyrocketing expansions also to areas for which a couple of years ago we would have thought globally that car sharing, or the very concept of car sharing, would never have a realistic chance. Well, here you go, we've been proven wrong. It's in strong expansion. And one of the reasons that we have for this is that people are trying to understand that the option of modes is at the same time evolving and at the same time converging. So we had traditionally, of course, all these instruments, mobility tools like taxis, private cars, delivery vans, and bikes. And then came the trip sharing agencies, came the limousine services, came the ride sharing companies, came the ride hailing companies, then came bike sharing. That there were convergences into several modes, for example, towards car sharing. It got electrified. Out of bike sharing came e-bike sharing, then came cargo bike sharing, corporate shuttles came in, and all this, of course, sees on the long term, on the medium to long term, we must say by now, a modal convergence towards demand responsive transit and autonomous vehicles. That's the part for car sharing. Let's now briefly look at ride sharing. Ride sharing is the second tool that is also very performant in this mix of mobility modes. A very short flashback, the turbulent beginnings of ride sharing. Ride sharing has initially been set up from the very first day to fill unused capacities in vehicles on existing trips. That means if you've got 3 spare seats in your car because you drive alone, you fill them with people who want to do all the parts of the trip in the same direction that you're going. As I said, it had turbulent beginnings. The first time that ride sharing really had a broad economic impact was the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, when in Montgomery, Alabama, there was a racial segregation on the buses. White patrons had to sit on the front and black patrons in the back. And this lady on the right, Rosa Parks, one day refused to give up her seat for a white patron and was arrested, of course, and that sparked off riots and protests of the black population, where for several months black patrons refused to ride public transit and walked instead. And what they also did is they shared private vehicles. They introduced ride sharing. So this is a picture from the Time Life archives. You see the transit bus in the back running empty and the black population sharing private vehicles. I think it's a Studebaker here in the front. So that was the beginning of ride sharing. And now, of course, ride sharing has seen a very strong evolution, is often compared or mixed up with ride sourcing, which brings us also to the limits of the shared economy. So the question is, what is ride sharing today? Well, obviously, we've got a set of technology wars. And it's a picture I almost got run over when I was making that picture in Queens, New York. Apart from the fact that I've never remotely heard of anybody really making 10 grand a month driving Uber, the question is, where are the limits of the share economy, and what is share economy and what is on-demand economy or platform economy? And it's very useful to be aware of the definitions. Share economy is a better use of underused assets or services, matching needs and haves directly from individuals to individuals, whereas collaborative consumption is renting, lending, swapping, and sharing in ways and scales not possible before the internet. And on-demand services are platforms expressly built to match consumer needs with providers for immediate delivery of goods and services. This is the definitions from Rachel Bätzner. She originally coined the term of sharing economy. And these days that gets a little, there's a tendency that this gets messed up a little bit. E-hailing services such as drivers and lifts, they have a brilliant business technology. But on the other hand, the problem, what they do is they put on an extra vehicle on the road for a specific trip. So TNCs, transportation network companies, are not ride sharing in the current layout. And of course, the question is, with vehicle sharing, what are the emerging opportunities and challenges in the future? Now, very recently, more modes popped up. This is scooter sharing. It's a picture I took in Moscow a couple of weeks ago. So what you see here is public e-scooters that are attached to some kind of urban furniture, and that can be booked via an app on the phone, and people can use it as microtransit for the last mile. You see as a metro station and a trolley bus in the back. We see also shared cargo bikes. Here's both a shared car and a shared cargo bike in Berlin. Then we should not forget that we have also in urban small cargo, we've got modifications. that are taking hold. For example, cargo transport by taxi. This is a picture from IKEA in Singapore. The IKEA in Singapore does not have a parking garage like your normal IKEA has. It has a taxi queue, and people buying their stuff at IKEA take their stuff away from the taxi. This is people queuing for taxis, and it's actually very fast because the taxis, as you saw in the picture before, keep driving in. So there's no need to own a car, which is a very frequent excuse because then and when you need to go to IKEA on a Saturday afternoon. Then there's mobility pricing, which comes in. Electronic road pricing. This is also a picture from Singapore, Mark IV electronic road pricing in Singapore in operation with dynamic phasing out and phasing in to prevent artificial effects of trip delays. All these ideas of spatial or temporary access limitations for vehicles in urban areas are not exactly new. What you see on the left of this plate, stone plate from the Roman age, it basically says from the next 1st of January, it is not allowed to anybody between sunrise and the 10th hour to use the streets of the city of Rome with a vehicle. Excepted from this are freight transport for temple construction and other public works, and for the removal of debris. Permitted are further racing vehicles and the vehicles of the Circus Maximus. That was 45 BC. So it's not exactly a new idea, but we need to reapply that and put it in line with the rest of the regulations that we have. Other instruments that came in, dedicated car sharing vehicles. This is a study by a German firm using a heavy duty design, easy to clean, for a new type of urban vehicle that would be specially built for sharing. This is a vision of stackable city cars by Mitchell Joachim from the MIT Media Lab, with the idea, I mean, these cars fit into each other like supermarket trolleys, and here also the idea is to save precious urban space. What you see if sharing goes wrong is some of the bike parking that you see outside transit stations. This is a picture from Singapore where you see that shared bikes, despite the racks being at disposal, tend to be left in an uncontrolled way by their users when they complete their trips. This is another example where there you see shared bikes illegally parked in Singapore. It can be addressed through technology, but technology is expensive, and we know that the Chinese bike rental system has taken what you call an IT, a brute force approach with an uncontrolled invasion of the public space, the result of which you see in the back with a picture from Shanghai and the retrieved shared bikes. Now let's expand the ecosystem further from vehicle sharing. What is very interesting is that recently in Los Angeles, car sharing, which traditionally catered and also does in Switzerland to the educated middle classes that see it as a status symbol not to own a car. For the first time in Los Angeles, very recently now, car sharing has been introduced as a solution to a low-income area, to an area where people had trouble owning a car because maybe they work 2 or 3 jobs in a day on minimum wages. And it's taken a very good start. It's entirely electric. It's the Bolloré Blue Car system that has been set up. And it's a very hopeful, it gives us a lot of hope to see car sharing expand into new markets and leaving this rather academic middle class field that it's been working in previously. So this is really new, will be interesting to watch. Similarly, we need to see that transit still and always in a lot of areas is cumbersome. This is the BART system in San Francisco, a few pictures, which was built initially and conceived as a train for the space age. And it's come downhill a little bit. I mean, it still uses the same magnetic paper tickets that it used on the day of its opening because it saw years of underinvestment. And if we want to have car sharing succeed, we need quality transit, and we need to invest in that. And maybe take some examples from Asia, where here in Hong Kong with the Octopus card, which is the local public transport card, you can not only use transit, but you can pay for public parking, you can pay your food, you can pay for your burger at McDonald's. So the fare media is becoming a city access card. And then, of course, there are new global standards. Uber, which operates its car services in 390 plus markets globally right now, is integrating into other shared modes. They just bought Jump, which is a bike share platform. And the idea behind all this is the simplicity. And of course, there are all kinds of marketings and incentives that are possible. An example from Singapore, you use your Grab app to pay, which Grab is also a ride-hailing service. You pay for your soup in a franchise restaurant, and the soup comes at half the price it would come normally. So that's just a few examples how the ecosystem can be expanded. Let me very quickly, 5 minutes, speak about current trends affecting shared modes. What we did in Switzerland recently is we introduced a one-way with the red cars between the station. The station-based cars can be picked up in one station and left in another. It's not a free-floating system, but it's a hybrid between both, which has seen a very good response with customers. Also, what we did very recently in Zurich, we introduced electric scooters, 200 fully electric scooters, free floating in a municipal area in Zurich, including the universities and the most accessed locations outside. So you use the app, you book the scooter, you unlock it, you open the box on the back opens, there's 2 helmets in there, you put on the helmet, of course there's a hygiene layer inside it, disposable, which to kind of keep people away from other people's maybe greasy hair. And the interesting thing is what we did is this also uses the Swiss pass that I was talking about previously. So the national fair media that you can hold to the scooter talks to you, and it opens once you made the reservation just by holding the Swiss pass to the side of the vehicle. What we did also is we introduced a ride-sharing app called Mobility Carpool, where we propose people to use ride-sharing, complementing transit, and they can activate the car-sharing trips they take. Plus, they can also insert on the platform their private car trips, and then other people see these trips, and they can register for the free seats. And this is a product we launched also very recently, so it needs time to grow, but the early start is very promising. Very quickly, a focus on the land use. If we talk about technology, we need to always ask ourselves where technology has been born. Ride-hailing has been born in the Silicon Valley. This is if you fly in over the Sierra Nevada into the Bay Area. You see what you see in the back is the airport of San Jose, and what you see on the lower right in the middle of the picture is the site of the Tesla factory in Fremont. So you see that urban nightmare that the Silicon Valley is. And despite a train going through it, which only operates 4 trains per hour, which is 2,500 seats per hour, and per direction maximum, which is a joke, if I may say so. If you look at the mobility demand that is in the valley, still we need to see how we can get forward and take that forward. One option is smart streetscapes, so streets which have LED lights in and which assign certain street surfaces to certain customers. We will need more curb space for loading and idling in the future. We will need drop-off and pickup locations. This is an example which is operational at Frankfurt Airport, where the LED lights in the street, just as in the concept, the architectural concept before, they show in green and red and yellow where a car stops and where other cars can drive around. So it's a surface on which pedestrians and cars outside the terminal share the space at low speed, and where the lights help the street signals where a person can go. Then there's the issue of future cities. If they are layered, this is a bit dystopian vision for Singapore, which is high density living in the future. And then again, it's infrastructural. We need to break it down to the street. This is not a bus stop. This is a pickup and drop off location that they build in a rail station, near a rail station, a metro station in Singapore. And it's standard part of all mass transit stations in Singapore now. This is a place where private vehicles can stop to pick up or offload passengers, and still they will have shelter, they will have all the comfort, and they will be meters away on the right. On the right is the subway entrance. It's fully integrated with the shared bikes. So it's really a micro transportation hub that each and every subway station becomes. And this is infrastructurally, I think, where we need to go. These are visions that I made for the future of 3D urbanisms, where we also need to think about integrating horizontal and vertical mobility with mobility devices, future autonomous vehicles that can not only go back and forth and left and right, but also up and down, blending them with elevator technology that could make spaces in the sky literally accessible as a shopping mall is today. And then we can talk about 3D opportunity spaces that we can access, for example, with urban cable cars, and then it becomes very interesting architecturally to talk about what you can do. Now, very quickly, I'll take 5 more minutes. I'm running a little late, unsurprisingly, to the to finish with the real questions we need to ask. So we need to put those topics on the public agenda that really matter to the folks out there. Streams of small road vehicles cannot replace streams of big vehicles. A traffic jam of AVs or EVs is still a traffic jam. Is autonomous vehicle ownership desirable? I'm asking if it's desirable, not if it's feasible. Of course it's feasible. That's what large parts of the car industry would like to see. Keep the current business model, put AV technology in the cars they sell us, and our cities are going to be a nightmare. So we need a social discourse on these things. Do people perceive being driven by an autonomous vehicle as equal to driving themselves? And then what does capsule transport do to society if instead of trains we have all these little eggs in which people travel? So autonomous vehicles are a super precious new tool, but they are not the silver bullet that some people want to make us believe they are. It's the operational model that matters at the end of the day, whether autonomous vehicles are heaven or hell. And it's Robin Chase, the co-founder of Zipcar, who brilliantly defined that scenario. If you've got a dispatch fleet of robo-taxis, the autonomous vehicle deployment will be heaven. If it's private automobiles with AV technology in them, well, it's going to be a lot worse than it is today because the VMT number, the vehicle miles traveled, are going to increase dramatically. So what effect on land use can these robo-taxis have? Do we want to reverse suburbia, or do we want to foster it by finding better tools to serve it? It's a basic question. This is why I talked in the beginning of its unsustainability. Do we need both in order to get working on it? How do we deal with it? Do we want to support better urbanism, or do we want to repeat the errors of the past? And what are the core variables a future transit system is to optimize? How do we weigh factors like travel time, comfort, and externalities? How and on what levels does interconnection happen? What does the terminal of the future look like? Maybe a little bit like what I just showed from Singapore. What is a bus stop in an AVH? How do we integrate horizontal and vertical mobility for 3D urbanism? How does building design have to adapt when there's no more parking, but when the curb is what we fight over? What do streetscapes made up of curbsides look like? And what are the operational and comfort parameters for future urban rail operation? Or basically, what is the train of the future? I'm not certain that it will be a hyperloop. But we need to understand very certainly that we need to formalize certain informal modes like shared taxis and private and corporate transport, and also transport today that is today illegal. And on the other hand, deformalize fixed route transit, new fixed route modes, and BRT mix services. A good example is here from Moscow, where they took the Marshrutkars cars, the old illegal minibuses from the left, and formalized them and made them wheelchair accessible in order to use the advantages they have while eliminating the disadvantages. Same picture from Brazil, picture from a research I made. The cable car that you see in the back, it's on the left hand of the picture is a suburban rail station. The cable car that leads to the right and serves an informal housing area on a hill. That cable car, they ran out of cash. The state of Rio de Janeiro, they closed it, and of course illegal transport took over. What you see that is what then is an illegal transport van waiting, idling for passengers. And here you see what the city then did to formalize it and to give the operators a certain liberty while controlling and enforcing certain standards, to take these advantages that demand responsive transport can provide in filling the gaps in demand and supply between scheduled and individual demand for transportation by superimposing them. So AVs, of course, in the future can be very valuable to extend catchment areas and to extend the possibilities of mass transport. And what we see with these little autonomous shuttles that are popping up literally all over the world is basically nothing else in that optics, in that point of view, than the Philippine jitney that gets the best elements of it get retained, its flexibility, its knowledge of the local terrain, and it gets formalized by making it reliable and by making it more by making it more sustainable also at the end of the day. And just the last couple of slides, a few examples of electrification. If we talk about mode assignment in the future, can we replace a mass transit bus by a fleet of small vehicles? That is one of the big questions. Imagine a diesel bus working the main road. Can we just electrify it? Can we just put batteries in it? At the moment, no. Battery buses at the moment are suitable for local distribution services, but not for large fixed route things, and that is not going to change probably in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's very difficult to do that kind of replacement by if we want to avoid small vehicles. What we can do though is to use the technology that we have at disposition and upgrade it. This is, for example, what China does. Use the smart trolley bus, which is a technology that is proven. We fit it with batteries. We upgrade the trolley bus so that it can do 10 to 15 kilometers off its wires, without its wires, either with opportunity charging, this is a Swiss development, or really by intelligently stabilizing networks, a Swiss development made by a collaboration of industry, research, and the government, where a century-old technology has been projected into the future and delivers results much better than a battery-only bus could ever do. I let these slides for your further research, for your further reading. So to close this, it's about new space-based thinking. It's about integrating demand responsive transportation with land use and with fixed route. It's challenging the suburban space. It's being conscious of the macroeconomic impact that you can lever. It's about setting new global standards by integrating diverse actors in the mobility marketplace, by using it on the fare level, on the marketing level, a 360-degree integration. That is the Swiss approach, and we'll continue to have this country as a lab for innovation, and very curious to learn from all of you and to continue evolving with all of you out there. So thank you very much. I'll close with this Nicolas Negroponte citation at the Disrupting Mobilities Conference in fall 2015 at the MIT Media Lab. Nicolas Negroponte said, "I don't care what Uber Lab is for. By the way, have you been on a Swiss train recently?" That was a very nice citation. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm very curious to hear your questions.
Okay, thank you, Arnd. Great presentation. We have currently 3 questions, so if other people want to send in their question, please do. We still have a bit of time, but I'll just take them one after the other, and you can answer within 1 or 2 minutes. So the first question is 25% of car sharing pods operated at a loss. I guess this is related to your first slides when you were talking about the Swiss example. Are the other 75% operating with enough profit to cover for these losses?
Well, that's a very good question. And at the moment they are. I mean, we are a co-op, and the co-op needs to be run like a normal private business. You need to make money. And the only difference with the co-op is that you don't necessarily pay shareholders in money with a dividend, but you do reinvest what you make operating your business. You're basically reinvested into your business. And yes, the other 75% basically pays for those that we operate at a loss. But of course, we are also on the quest for new models. So we have sponsorship models. We talk to local communities if they want to kind of set up a sponsorship plan or something like that, because with the global transport costs sinking and with players in the market like Uber that subsidize their services and operate them at a loss, I mean, Uber loses at this point $16 million every single day, every day, 16 million US, right? And with players like these in the marketplace, of course, you can't. You need to watch your costs, and you need to watch what you charge people. If not, if there's a ride-hailing option or something that is more attractive or more or cheaper even than car sharing, then people, of course, at some point will switch. So yes, we need to. We at the moment we are having these 75% roughly that pay for the others, but then again, it's a thin margin. It's a retail business, and then again, also for the future, we're looking at new models to operate now.
Okay, thanks. The other question is, it seems that increasing transport needs globally are being met by road transportation. Is there a role for new trains somewhere?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, the point is that a train or even a BRT, if there's no money for a train, so a bus rapid transit. And that's the important thing. It defines an urban axis. It defines an axis of development. And along that axis, you will see, and that is proven zillions of times all over the world, along that axis, if it's halfway well set up, you will see residential and business development. And then the value of that development is going to increase because you've got that train that not only serves you, but that brings you your passengers, that brings people, that facilitates movements, that enables access to inner cities. So having mass transit fixed route mass transit near you that is performing, especially light rail and heavy rail, is very interesting for developers. And it tends to augment your real estate value. And in the future, suburbia, the rise of suburbia would not have happened without the downfall of the urban rail networks in the United States. I mean, there was the demise of Pacific Electric, which is very famous, where in the 1950s, General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone bought up lots of the hundreds, 800 or 900 of the urban transport networks, rail-based urban transport networks in the United States that had exactly defined those urban axes and where cities developed along the rail. They closed them down, they converted them to motor bus operation, and then it was open to do anything anywhere. And that was one of the major factors behind the rise of suburbia. So yes, absolutely. We shouldn't forget that in 2050, we need to feed 10 billion people on this planet. And we can't just put anything anywhere. We need surfaces for agriculture. We need surfaces for recreation. So we need to watch what we do with our landscapes out there and with our surfaces. And the train is the most efficient tool we always had and we always will have.
Do you think improving the quality and convenience of public transit systems in suburban areas and more rural regions can have a negative impacts on territory density by making it easier for people to live farther from the city centers?
Well, that's a very good one also. The question, of course, is at the end of the day, we want to have less vehicle miles traveled. So what we need to do is in places where we put the transit, it should be mass transit. It should carry a lot of people, and it should carry them in a very comfortable and worthy way. And it should have a comfort ultimately that equals, if not exceeds, that of your private car. And of course, you've got this what you call induced demand. So by making transportation options too attractive, you can, of course, have problems that too many people start doing long distance commutes. We already have that in Switzerland to a certain degree. For example, between Zurich and Bern, we've got trains at the peak hours every 15 to 20 minutes. And I'm talking about a double-story, 12-car intercity full-size train. And that train will be packed in first class, and members of the federal government in the morning will have to sit on the stairs to the upper deck because the train is so full. So, of course, there are limits to growth, and there are also limits to mobility. But again, clever use of land use, clever use and integration of shared and fixed route modes is the best tools that we have to steer that. But it needs to be integrated with land use planning. The age where transportation planning was on one hand and land use planning and urban design was on the other, that is over.
Thanks. Next question. Do you have evidence in Switzerland that mobility shared cars are replacing vehicles for those that would otherwise own cars, or is it possible that users would otherwise use transit or bikes?
No, that's very interesting. That's a very interesting point. What we have is that for the red cars, for the station-based cars, we have proven it over and over that these cars, there were, I think, about 15 scientific studies over the years that proved that the people who subscribe to the red car service, they dump first the first vehicle and very often even the second, or they don't even get one. So that is a very clear effect. And as I said, the order of magnitude is anything between 10 and 18 cars that are replaced, privately held cars or cars from businesses also, that get replaced by the shared vehicles, by the station-based ones, because the people will know they will have one or several vehicles that they need, from the smart car to the delivery van, somewhere near them in their neighborhood. The second part is the free floating. The effect is less clear for the free floating. And for the free floating, indeed, especially in the systems in Germany, we have evidence that free floating car sharing, sometimes because of the laziness of people and the low price, it does replace trips which would have otherwise been taken by transit, would have been taken by walking, or would not have been taken at all. And all three of these are bad. That shouldn't happen. That is something we need to address. This is also one of the reasons why we have our free-floating systems in Basel and Geneva very closely monitored by a university research institute in order to see and to deter if these effects are there. And in the future, we could think of something like at night, when public transit in Switzerland, public transit basically, with a few exceptions, doesn't run at night. So, for example, if you use free floating car sharing at night on a route where public transit would be available, then it's okay. If you use it during the day, you pay a sort of a penalty fee because you could just also ride public transportation. These are the ideas we're discussing and we're thinking about for the future. And at some point, it needs to be addressed with policymakers and regulators. And of course, it's a big discourse to get this going, but there are ideas out there, and we're thinking very closely and monitoring very closely to have the minimum of these effects.
Thank you. What are the current main operational challenges of the Swiss system?
Well, the main operational challenges are, for example, to even find parking spaces. A parking space in a dense area like Zurich is something like can easily be something like $600 a month to rent. So this is really a challenge, and then we need to, at some point we would have to raise the fares, and that would make our vehicles less attractive in comparison to other modes. And that, for example, can be turned into a challenge. The other challenge is, of course, is securing good places at the rail stations that really, I mean, we pay for them. We don't get them for free because we're the nice guys. We pay for them like everybody else does. But for example, if in some places they are tendered out, then we need to see where the limits are and what we can do to keep these parking sites in place. And finally, then, of course, we have got new options like ride hailing. That is, I mean, Uber is illegal in Switzerland, but still we've got new offers that are operated at a loss, and that bring a competition into the marketplace that can artificially operate at lower costs at the moment. And this is something we would want to see integrated. We want to see it integrated with the others and not as some sort of enemy. So we don't want any hostile takeover. And the approach in Switzerland, also the governmental approach, is to have everything integrated and contribute to each other's. We do not want standalone systems. This is something we don't want because it's not sustainable, it's not productive, and it maximizes energy use instead of minimizing it.
Thanks. Someone says, I've been on a Swiss train recently. I loved it. Who was the main institutional leader in the Swiss mobility system you described? The federal government, cantons, or cities?
All of them. We've got a federal system which is carefully calibrated between all of them. And we've got exactly, it's a very good question because it basically provides the answer. It's a careful equilibrium between the federal government level, the cantonal government level, and then the municipal level. And whether the citizens vote on something or whether decisions are taken, it's always between at least two of them. If it's not something super local, or at least, or sometimes even three of them, there's a big mechanisms, platforms, discussion forums that take place, and very carefully calibrated financial and planning steering tools that guarantee that the interests of everybody are well equilibrated. They can't always be fulfilled, but Switzerland has, I mean, we've got 4 languages in this country. So we need to learn from very young to be able to, of course, defend our position. But at some point, sometimes you need to stand back, even if you're a large majority, and say it would be discriminatory against a small minority if we don't stand back on this one and let them have it because it's very important to them. So we learn to equilibrate these things since very early. And it's an active discourse. Transportation is one of the main favorite subjects of discussion in this country. And for example, if a fast train, a train stop would be canceled on a route of a fast train, that's a major political thing. So you better start planning that 5 years in advance if you want to get that operational, or you're the bad guy.
Have you seen a big difference in popularity between hub-based and free-floating car sharing?
We think that what we observe is that basically there's surprisingly enough a strong demand for the station-based return car sharing, because people want to have that security of having a car near them if they want to drop a car. And it turns out now after almost a decade of free-floating systems around the globe operating, we are starting to see that having to search for a car, having to secure it for 10 minutes and then walk there and try to find it, where it is parked. This is something that many people, apparently, many of our customers at least, do not see as intuitive as they know that the pod is there. They book that car maybe 2 weeks or 2 days in advance, or maybe even 10 minutes, but they walk up there, the car is there, and they know where their car is, where their car, between inverted commas, is, and they can get it there. So both of the systems have their strengths and weaknesses. This is also why we operate both of them in some locations. They are in a certain way complementary, but their strengths and differences are not the same. They are different between free floating and return car sharing. And people have a very strong support for the return car sharing. It's not that it is sometimes it is being said it's the old version and it's a model to phase out. Not at all. It's got its own customer base and it's got its own strengths that people are very, if they once have subscribed to it, and also new ones, they are very attached to that.
Okay, thanks. Why do people move from privately owned cars to car sharing? Because of social norms, price, or convenience?
Well, it's a mixture of all. I mean, of course, there's social norms. What you need to have is you need to have an environment where at some point you can say that shared cars are more attractive, more sexy, more status-like than owning your own vehicle that sits in a parking lot for 23.5 hours a day. So of course, you also need infrastructural bases. I mentioned it before. You need a good mass transit system that is the backbone of everything, that is very performant, very reliable, and very attractive also financially and from a comfort perspective, to be the backbone and to have a car sharing system succeed locally. It does not happen without mass transit. Some people tried it, it failed. It doesn't happen. Mass transit is the backbone, and then people can have a car if they need one. And it's a mix of infrastructure and social factors at the end of the day that will decide if your system succeeds or not, because the consumer out there is free to do whatever he pleases. Also in Switzerland, you're free to buy your own car if you can pay for it, even in Singapore. So if you want to convince people, you better come up with a good service and an attractive offer.
Thanks. Someone asked, do you have an estimate of the unit costs, like per travel kilometers, of the described car sharing system?
Well, I mean, the costs, of course, are very close. I mean, we try to bring them very close to where the tax deductible for operating a private vehicle is in the median. So that's obvious. I mean, it's like in the US where there's the IRS tax deductible for a middle class car. I think that's currently around 46 US cents. In Switzerland, it's more close to 70 Swiss cents, which is 72 US cents. So we try to bring it, of course. I mean, that would be a median for a middle class vehicle, but we try to bring it somewhere there and to play on scale effects to be efficient in production.
Thanks. Another question. We often hear that car ownership is justified by family with young children. Have you seen cases where alternatives to car ownership have had a good impact for families?
Absolutely, excellent question. The point is actually people having a family and kids are in Switzerland among the major regions. We know that from surveys that people get their own car. And we had, for that reason, just as an anecdote, a long debate was going on for years over the provision of retaining seats for children for the car sharing vehicle. So we tried everything from boxes near the major pods where the seats would be inside, and of course it's a hygiene problem. It's you've got they get stolen, they don't get people don't put them back correctly, it adds complexity to the system. And we could resolve that only on the day where a portable child retaining system that doubles as a backpack hit the market, and where we could buy those and sell those via our web shop and guide people to have these. So people could basically carry these super light child retaining systems that would officially be legal to secure a child in the car. They could buy them and they could carry them around with them if they weren't in the car, for example, on a leisure trip. And that was really a game changer for these things. So that's a good example for where you can bring your customers back and keep them in the car sharing system if you come up with an innovative solution.
Thanks. There's three questions left. One is in French, and so I'll keep that one for the end. But the two other English one is, what can Canada learn from the Swiss model for achieving urban planning models for transit across cities?
I didn't get the second word. What can whom learn? Sorry, didn't get it.
What can Canada learn from the Swiss model for achieving urban planning models for the transit across cities?
Well, I think it's very first and foremost, Canada is in an excellent starting position. If I look at not only Montreal but also Vancouver, with exactly the items I mentioned here, a trolleybus system that can be expanded now to a mixed with battery and trolley operation, a light rail system. 40. I read a couple of days ago that 50% of the trips in Vancouver by now, the daily trips, are being taken on sustainable modes. So Canada has an excellent starting position. The points that would need to be addressed is, of course, the suburbia problem, and there you would probably want to see in the future more and better integration with commuter rail, light rail, metro, and, for example, these autonomous shuttles that do last mile service. Sorry, but then again, it's about last mile service. It's not about replacing a light rail by autonomous shuttles. That's not going to work out. It's a density question. But what you can have is you can expand and build new fixed route transit in a very clever way and address what today is suburbia by these new autonomous modes that can finally provide on-demand transport at reasonable cost, because of the effects of scale. And then ultimately, you can set urban incentives to undevelop suburbia and merge it back around the mass transit lines. So I'm thinking about, for example, the whole thing between the Pont Champlain in Montreal, which urgently, for example, would be a place where a rail link that goes to the terminus Panama would be something that it could be set in place. But I think the urban structures are there, and Canada has the technology and the examples in the country. And if we exchange the knowledge globally, I think there are lots of opportunities, and it will be fine.
What role can road pricing play in reducing congestion, incent modal shift, and generate revenue for Switzerland's sustainable transportation system?
Oh, road pricing is very, very important. There are two aspects here. The first is that we also, in Switzerland, we have road pricing for the national highway system. So there's a sticker that you buy. I mean, it's the most basic thing that you can imagine. You buy a sticker at the beginning of the year, you stick it on your windshield, and it gives you 365 days of access to the national highway system. But that, of course, is a system that's 30 years old or 35 years old. Today, I showed it in this talk. You have these solutions that, for example, Singapore, which has an electronic system, which is in its fourth generation, with dynamic phasing in and phasing out of price caps. And this is probably the way to go. And then it needs to be integrated, and it is important with the transit pricing, so that we have what we call mobility pricing. So that, for example, if the road pricing goes up, transit pricing goes down. There would be just one example, so that you always have great mobility options at hand for people, but that you can control it. Even the most luxurious S-Class Mercedes or a Caddy sedan is worthless if you're sitting in a traffic jam. It doesn't get you anywhere. And the most precious value that most people have these days is the time of their lives. So integrating that with road pricing is a very, very performant steering tool. What you need to be aware of if you design it, and that is the second part, is that there are compensation effects. For example, in London, which was among the first to introduce an electronically monitored congestion zone about 2 decades ago, we observe a compensation effect in the sense that many of the vehicles that are allowed to enter for free, or that are allowed to enter more easily these days, are the electric vehicles. And basically all the delivery vehicles that enter in there, or most of them these days, are electric. So there's a phasing in also financially. People charge their customers more so that they can pay for the van to drive in there. So basically the London congestion charge is very close. I mean, the traffic situation in central London is today very close to where it was 20 years ago. And now they need to talk about the next level to kind of get it back to the situation where it was at the beginning of the congestion charge. So it's a constant evolution of modes, and it's not a one-way thinking. You always need to take into account how people react to your system. It's a dynamic evolution.
So the last question, which is the French one, but the person asked me to translate it. I'll do my best. She says that here, I guess in Quebec, there are many private companies that offer transportation service, such as the public transit, and then we have Communauto and Car2Go and all those types of services. And she says that complexifies the collaboration with the different actors. Do you have any recommendations how to facilitate the development of an integrated system? So where do we start if we want to move towards what the Swiss system is, given what we are currently facing here?
Well, in Switzerland, we also have a number of state-owned and private operators that operate under the same or different brands. The crucial point is to control the efficiency of these operators and to integrate them into the same tariff system. So you want them to be accessible via the same, not only booking system, but also integrated ticketing system, the same fare media, and you want them also at some point to include them visually. I showed these slides of the mobility car in Geneva, which, like in all Swiss big cities, has the logo of the local public transport fare community on it to show that it is a public transport vehicle, a self-drive public transport vehicle. And I think the crucial point is here to use branding and marketing tools to make it intuitive that it's part of a bigger, greater system, even if it's being operated by a private entity that is financially, for example, not necessarily linked to the others. And for example, one of the great things I saw is the city of Moscow, where about 13 different car sharing companies operate, but all of their cars have an identical paint scheme in the sense that they have got the back part of the car that has some orange elements on them that are very easy to apply on the vehicle via some coding. But the point is they are easily recognizable as car sharing vehicles. And that is just one example beside the ones that we have. But it's important to make the customer feel that it's part of a bigger system, because that makes it intuitive and easy. And again, the big asset, between inverted commas, that the private car ownership has is that despite all the drawbacks it has, people in many cases still perceive it as being easier to operate or navigate than public transportation. And this is something on the comfort level that we need across this industry to address urgently if we don't want to lose our customers. So it's a very, very important question, and hardware, infrastructure, and marketing play in the same way. I mean, we could talk about lots more about that, but I think c'est une version short pour une question à très grande dimension. Voilà, on va dire comme ça.
Maybe I'll take the last question, Arnd, because one of the particularities of Quebec is that we have a lot of hydro, and a lot of our decision makers seem to have a lot of hope that electrification is going to be the solution to much of our decarbonization issues and way forward. So I'm just curious to see, how that weighs in car sharing versus, really pushing more towards electrification of vehicle, which is currently what's being done. There's not much being done on the car sharing side from our politicians. But how do you see these two worlds converge, or is there any opportunities for that?
Well, that is a big question. The point here is that everybody indeed talks about electrification, and it became fashionable in the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, it really gained traction among people that did not really consider it before, let's put it this way, or political environments that did not really consider it before. It's partly due to a marketing side, of course. I mean, Tesla is probably, Elon Musk, one of his permanent achievements that will stay there forever is that he made the electric car sexy. I have an electric vehicle that's 22 years old. By that time, people stopped in the street when they saw it pass. So that shows you what long way we've already come with electricity. But now, if electricity really, as you say, gets scaled up and electric propulsion of car sharing vehicles or even private vehicles gains in acceptance, then at some point we need to ask ourselves, how do we stabilize our networks? And where does that electricity come from? Consumers tend to say the electricity comes from the power socket. Well, that's the view that the consumer might be okay with the consumer, but not for us who need to organize it. So at the end of the day, we need to find some solution to upgrade electric networks, both on the long distance from the, for example, hydroelectric plants, which is a big asset in Quebec that we also have in Switzerland, to the consumer in the end of the day. And we need to have an unideological discourse about electricity production. And of course, I mean, a Tesla car that runs on electricity, which is produced from coal, is dirtier than a modern car that runs on gasoline or even natural gas. So we shouldn't be naive here. We need a holistic view, and we need to very carefully determine what comes from where. In Switzerland, about 6% in the global and in the Swiss energy mix that are generated from hydropower in the mountains, they are about sufficient to operate the electric public transportation, which means the trains, the light rail, and the trolley buses, and also in the future new modes that will be electric. But then, and up to now, we could keep the 6%. What we gained, what we did in terms of extending the offer, we could gain in efficiency of better use of energy through more efficient train sets, for example. But in the future, with electric cars out there, we also need to consider aspects, for example, of network stabilization. And if you look at the slides after the webinar, you will see that the slides I briefly showed of these 2 Swiss trolley buses, their magic and their really innovative character lies in the fact that they can stabilize the electric network. So they are intelligent, they learn what the actual situation in the electricity network, to which they are connected, of course, because they run on the wires. They learn what the actual situation is, and they know exactly when to recharge their batteries and when not to do it. And this is an example. This is why this trolley bus is such a marvelous tool and is so important. It's a good example of how we think holistically with a local solution. And this is also a thing that we need to transfer first to car sharing, where we're also trying, as you said, to expand our fleet and to expand the acceptance of the electric fleet, and then later to also fleets of the remaining, hopefully few remaining private vehicles that will remain with the autonomous electric shared vehicles in operation. So somewhere like that, we need to define a scenario, but it's super important to have a broad view. It's not a local solution. The electricity does not come from the power socket. It comes from a super complicated grid that already these days is at the verge of a blackout many times a year without us consumers on the consumer side noticing. So we need to be very well aware of that.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Arnd. This has been a really useful and constructive presentation. For people that have more questions, I guess they can just send directly the questions to you via email. And for the participants, just note that the presentation video will be on our YouTube webinar series. I will send the link to everyone so you can share it afterwards or watch it again. So with that, thank you so much, and until next time.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time, and questions with pleasure via email, but give me until the weekend to respond. Thank you very much.